Hey, and welcome back to Rapid Flow. My name is Erik. I'm the founder. I'm a sound engineer, and today I'm going to show you every little trick I know after 25 years of making music and sound engineering to get your kick and your bass balanced just right, and that will enable you to get your track also much louder than you're used to. So in order to do this, I'm going to be using the workflow that I've created, which is called the Erik Heirman template. But you can follow along this video and just clone this and copy it over to your own personal template if you prefer. For those of you that already have the Erik Heirman Ableton template, it's on V2. I'm just uploading this now, and it includes a few more copies of things, but I'll get to that in a second. So let me start off first with something to share with you, one of the best tricks that I found for getting your low end right. Let me bring in this track so that you can hear it really in its full detail. And let me solo just the low end. So one thing that I found over the years of performing both live but also especially in the studio is that it's super useful to have dedicated controls for all the tracks in your low end that typically have to do with the foundation with bass. So you will see here I have these little three encoders. One of them says kick low, one of them says bass low, and one of them says tom low. Now let me show you what these do. I'm going to just keep this on the kick and bass for now. And if I take you into the kick channel, you will see that I have a Pro Q3 with all kinds of EQ settings that are tuned and optimized for the kicks that are part of this template. But now let me show you what this button does, which is the cool thing. So this kick low, you see how it's pulling that frequency on Pro Q3, and I've made this template so it's accessible actually, and you can use it also just with any of the standard Ableton plugins. So you'll see it's actually doing the same thing over here. And now this is the best way that I found to control the low end of your kick. It's not with shelves, it's not with low cuts. Tried all that stuff for years, and the best way to get a clean bass boost or cut on your kick drum is to do a bell curve. See, and I've set up this EQ here on this backup using the Ableton native plugin to do exactly the same. So we're using this over the years for live performance. This is like a frequency range which works really well for this. Now let me show you what it sounds like. Let me boost. And just solo the low end again. And now let me remove . Let me also bring in the groove toms, because that's the third channel. I cannot begin to tell you the amount of times that I've been either producing here in the studio or on a festival sound system, and I've realized like, ooh, the toms sound way too bassy, or oh no, the bass is way too bassy, and having a dedicated control that you can just pull that frequency with, or the kick, or all of your low end tracks is just worth its weight in gold, and it's so easy to do. And today I had this intuition to make this video, even though things are a bit hectic here, and as you can see, it's like we're in the middle of sampling for a Zensphere and packing the house and whatnot, but I wanted to share this with you because over the years, mixing kick and bass is one of the most difficult things to do in electronic music. And once I sussed out this workflow, it was like a complete game changer for me, how easy it became to do this both on stage and in the studio. So sometimes you load up a new kick and it's just way too bassy, and you can hear it right away in your monitoring system. So this is the easiest way to be able to balance everything right away without having to open plugins, without having to grab your mouse. You just have three little dedicated encoders on one of your controllers with which you can balance the low end of the tracks that have generally low end against everything else in your track. Now, a very, very important aspect of this, of course, is how are you hearing this stuff? And I wanted to show you the Ableton stuff first, because that's the stuff that we can all relate to, I think, the easiest. So let me just show you one last time what this does to the track while it's playing everything full blast. And you can probably see here now, I'm overloading the output, and you'll see also that my limiters are having a tough time dealing with this, because right now there's way too much low end in this track. I'm just showing you what that would sound like. Actually kind of incredible how well it's dealing with it, but I can hear and I can see from the metering that this is too much. And one of the things that took me super long to learn and figure out is that I can guarantee you with like 99% probability that any kick or any bass synth you load is going to have too much bass for the track you're working on. Now, I don't know why it's like this. I suppose manufacturers just like to give you like stuff that you can work with, that you can cut away from. But in 99% of the cases, if you're having trouble getting your track loud, or when you bring in a new synth or a new kick drum into your workflow, I can guarantee you it's going to have too much low end. I've very rarely had it that I needed to boost the low end, and generally they need a bit of mids presence and a bit of high frequency boost to cut through the mix. Another super nice trick for this that I learned recently, or that I started using more and more recently, is that if a kick is not cutting through your mix, let me move this camera out of the way so I can, that's not what I wanted to do. I want to move this camera out of the way. You can actually zoom into that kick and just move the start point of your sample so it's not on a zero crossing. So this is actually, from a sound engineering point of view, not correct, but it'll give you a really nice click at the beginning of your kick, which is really nice to be able to get it to cut through the mix more. Let me show you. So here you can hear, I can put it further back in the mix, or really get it to be clicky, especially if I remove this filter, it would be much more intense. So if your kick, if you like everything about your kick, but it's missing like the punch at the transient, rather than layering and all this stuff, which I'm personally not a fan of, I think it's too much hassle, just move the start point of your sample a little bit into the waveform and you'll have a really nice little transient. Okay. The next thing, which is essential in many genres of electronic music, is to sidechain, obviously, your kick to the bass. I'm using a frequency-dependent sidechain with Shaperbox. However, I'm actually very surprised how clean just using Ableton Tremolo sounds compared to this. Let me show you. It's actually almost undistinguishable. I'm going to solo again here. So this is now the settings that you can copy if you want to just use a tremolo. And that's the shaper box. So it's like very, very close, and everywhere where on this template. So if you want to skip setting all of this up, you can just grab my template over on rapidflow.shop. You'll see that all of these plugins that are third-party plugins have a backup right after it for an Ableton native device. So if you're missing a plugin or 2 or 10 from this template, because it's pretty excessive, you'll find backups in there ready to go. And one of the biggest changes that I've just done now is I've created a backup for Console 1, because a lot of people ask me about this. And it's actually so simple. I only really use Console 1 to do a high cut on every channel and sidechaining. So you'll see that wherever I've used that, you'll find this backup, and let me show you what it does. I'm on the bass channel. Let me see, am I on the bass channel? Yes. Oh, it looks like I still need to map it here. So that's what you would need to do also, is just map the high cut. And what this is used for is just to control the high frequencies, in this case of the bass. Let me show you. Which over the years I've just found out is a really nice way to be able to control the energy of your track. And the same, like for the kick drum, it also has a dedicated high cut. So anyway, that was a little excursion into what's happened with the updates here. Now, what I was going to get to just before is how critically important it is how you monitor your low end. Because if you're not really hearing accurately what you're doing with your low end, it's almost impossible to mix. And if you're working in a really small room or with not great speakers, I highly recommend that you mix on headphones. The most reliable system I know for that is Slate VSX, and I would recommend you to get the Mike Dean room and the Howie Weinberg mastering room. Those two are enough for electronic music. You can hear everything you're doing. It's maybe also worth getting the Platinum Edition because then you get all the future rooms, but those are the two rooms I use 95% of the time. Now you're asking probably, why are you using these III headphones if you're recommending the VSX? It's because I've tuned the EQing on my, let's say, master output software so that it works also and sounds closer. As you can see, if I switch over here, this is my output software, which is running and basically processing everything leaving my DAW. And right now I have it set to this preset, which is III flatter as VSX, means I've tweaked these headphones to sound very close through this preset to what VSX sounds like. Unfortunately, I can't share this preset with you because the way that Sound ID reference does its licensing, it won't load my presets on your software. But let me click through it and let me give you the settings so that if you want to do this also, this will give you access to that. And what I've also done, and this is what I wanted to get to, is as you can probably see in my room, I have some really nice Amphion speakers. And even though these speakers are super good and I love them, I had to do a pretty massive change into the way that they sound in my room because I found them a bit too mid and high forward, and this would lead to me making mixes that were too subdued. So what I'm showing you here is that whatever it is that you're working with, my recommendation would be to load reference tracks in something like Adapter AB, which is worth its weight in gold. And one of the plugins that I can't create a backup for because of the way that it works, but this goes on sale very often for 29 bucks, and you can load in your reference tracks and then AB. Let me show you. And the way I've set this up is in my template, I use the crossfader on the APC 40 Mark II to be able to go between the two here. Nice workflow to be able to quickly reference your track. So yeah, again, it's a plugin that without it, like it's so hard to mix if you don't have that. And actually, it'll show you the spectrum of your track in production against your reference track. And actually just looking at this, you'll be able to see, do I have too much low end? Do I have too much low, like mids? Do I have too much highs? Let me show you. So the track here over on the right, that's the reference, was professionally mastered by Earthbound Mastering. So I know that I mean, I've heard it on Money Systems and it sounds really good. This is also a professionally mastered track. And I know that I can reference against those. I've put these in here so that I don't get a copyright strike and stuff on YouTube. So let me show you. Another tip I can give you for mixing your low end, which is super essential, which is something I learned from my wonderful friend Chelly, also known as Earthling, which is just such a good trick, is using Saturn, either 1 or 2 on the Magic Mastering preset, and just add a little bit of drive to the upper frequencies. This will make it audible on small speakers like iPhones, but it'll also bring your bass up front in a super nice way. So let me show you the difference for this. Let me actually solo again, just kick and bass. It does a little bit of controlling also. I've adapted the gain a bit to get it to sit better. But it just gives it also a little bit of overtones so that it sits in your mix correctly. And I did create also a backup for it with Ableton Tools. Have a listen. So a lot of this stuff is backed up with native Ableton Tools in case you don't have it, but having a little bit of saturation on your bassline is like the easiest way to get your bassline to cut through the mix without EQing it, which usually makes it sound artificial and weird, or without bringing it up to the level where it starts to overwhelm your low end. So if your track is not able to be mastered loud enough, so like right now this track is like really at the limit. Let me show you how loud it is using Youlean, which there's a free version of, so you can download it. I have the pro version because I like to support the companies whose plugins I use, but let me show you how loud this track is right now, actually. So we're at about -8 lufs, and we could easily go beyond that by boosting the limiters on the mastering chain here a bit. By the way, this is another great trick. Never use just one limiter on your output. Always use 2 in a row. Use the first to clip the first. Well, actually, ideally you have a clipper before it. Here you can see some really great settings. Then you have a limiter that's just catching the peaks, and then you use a secondary limiter to really boost the levels. Unlink the left and right because this has a kick drum going down the center. It'll give you a slightly wider stereo image. Thank you, Daniel of Earthbound Mastering, for giving me this trick, which is my pleasure to share with you. So if I wanted to get this track a little bit louder, it would be super easy to just boost the secondary limiter. And now let me show you where we're at. So now we're at like -7 lufs, but we start to lose dynamics. And honestly, I think -8 lufs is plenty loud. It'll sound great on a club system or a festival sound system. And I prefer personally to have a bit more dynamics in it than have everything squished to the wall. That was the primary part of me showing you how to mix the low end of your track. That's the main tricks that I have to show you. So these are the settings. Let me zoom in here to show you. So you could clone this over to your API 2500 plugin. Thresholds, basically you just want the needle to just be moving a little bit when your kick hits. Attack always on 30 milliseconds, ratio low, meaning 1.5 or 2. Release, I would put variable and do the fastest possible release you can so that it releases quickly. And I have it set to hard, tone to loud, and the new type of compression, and then linking is 100% left-right. And then I just boost it up so I get the same level going in and going out. That's the settings for compressing your kick with an API 2500. You can clone this onto a plugin. Let me load one quickly just to show you again. Just gives the kick a little bit more space to sit up front. I mean, this kick has already been processed with the API 2500, but if you need to compress your kick, this is absolutely what I would recommend for you. It's a really great way to get the kick to be punchy and a little bit more compact and upfront, and to control the low end. Very important, actually, something that I missed to show you on the kick drum is never ever have a kick drum that's way long and extends like, I don't know, like a full quarter note or even longer. As you can see, this kick is pretty short, and I'm also cutting away the end tail of it so that I'm only really interested in that coming through cleanly. If your kick drum would play way too back here, it will overlap with all your other low-end instruments, and it's going to unnecessarily take a lot of space up in the low end. So the kick drum should usually be like an 8th note. For electronic music with 4 to the floor, this is a great way to do it. If you're making like rumbling techno stuff, you know, to add a reverb and then sidechain the hell out of that, and you'd have like the techno thing, but I don't want to get into that right now. That's a very important detail. And then the last thing I want to show you is the importance from my point of view of mixing through a mastering chain. So all of this stuff that I've shown you today is going through the mastering chain designed by Earthbound Mastering. This is the mid-side mastering chain, which is actually boosting all this stuff in such a way that you get a very clean, punchy upfront sound at the mix bus rather than having to process all the individual tracks. And there's like some really cool stuff in here, like this cushy EQ is amazing for bringing stuff up front and not making it sound EQ'd. There is a backup for that also. There's a compressor which is doing just a little bit of pumping just to give it a bit of vibe. There's a clipper which is essential to control your levels a bit. And this is actually what I want to show you. This has been an update now to the Erik Heirman Ableton template, which is me, by the way. And that is, I've moved away from using the soft tube stuff because I found that the Empirical lab stuff sounds better. I've done a whole video on this where I show you the differences, but I've tested them extensively. So if you have the soft tube stuff, I've left it in there with the correct settings for this mastering chain. There is also a backup for Ableton. And as you can see here, I am now using the Empirical lab stuff. This is the settings that I use for my mastering chain. Let me show you. This should be a little bit less. I normally don't compress that hard. So I'm just usually again here just tickling the compressor, and very often I'm just doing 1 or 2 dB of gain reduction, but multiple times. I found, like the limiter trick I showed you, that leads to way louder, cleaner mixes than when you're slamming things 6 or 8 dB down of compression with one compressor. Compression, when you add it in high ratios over and over and over again, it's exponential. So like it just gets, your sound gets very, very flat. So I'd rather add little bits along the road, and this is what it sounds like here. Okay, that was the update with my template where I've now moved over to the Empirical lab stuff. As you can see, there is a backup also for these compressors. Then there's a clipper, which is a very essential part of mixing electronic music. Always clip your tracks a little bit before sending them into your limiter, because they'll have to do way less work and it's way cleaner than heavily limiting your tracks. Let me show you. You see how it jumped now when it's having to deal with those peaks? And you can hear that subconsciously and sometimes even clearly, that like your whole track is getting pushed down by the limiter every time the kick hits. Now, let me show you how clean it is if I clip those transients before I send it into the limiter. You see that now like barely has to do anything, and that's a way, way, way better way to do it. So that is the main stuff I wanted to show you. Let me just revisit here if anything's missing. As you can see, this is a workflow now where I'm leaving Ableton at a level and frequency distribution which is quite similar to what you would get from a master track. I mean, I'm referencing against masters while I'm producing. There's a ton of other stuff in this template. There's a whole setup to do DJing. There's a whole looping workflow for like percussions and stuff. There's live DJ effects, which is how I've been cutting all the frequencies while I'm talking over this. And like, yeah, there's a ton of stuff. I'll link the video which shows more details about this template in the description, and also somewhere in this video if I can figure out how to do that, because sometimes that stuff just baffles me. But more than anything, I wanted to use this video to give you an impression of what are some of the best tricks that I found for mixing low end, and how easy it is to actually apply this to your tracks, in the hopes of you being able to get a really loud, clean, punchy mix. So just to summarize, make sure your monitoring situation, whether it's headphones or speakers, is tuned in such a way with EQs and some kind of a software probably to fix problems with your room. I can recommend Sound ID Reference. And tune that so your reference tracks sound the way you think they sound sick in your room. I wouldn't recommend having it flat. That's the first thing. So get your monitoring under control. The second thing is, generally your tracks need way less low frequency content and density than you will imagine. So have a workflow set up to be able to remove low end from the core things in your track that have low end, kick, bass, and toms most likely. Everything else I would cut the low end from with a 12 dB per octave filter to just kind of smooth things out. I wouldn't do super harsh cuts. Third is use saturation on things like bass lines to get them to come up front. Fourth is use compression on things like the kick with the API 2500 type compressor. Never use a very short attack on the kick compressor, because it's going to neuter your kick in a way where it sounds really awful. Make sure your kicks are not too long so that they leave space for the bass notes that will follow, especially if you're doing more complex bass lines. And 5, mix through a mix bus or a mastering chain so that you know exactly what you're going to get when you hit bounce. And that way you take all the guesswork out of, you know, what's going to go completely upside down once you put it in a mastering chain, and then you realize, oh God, I can't get anything loud because I have way too much low end in my kick or in my bass, or all those kinds of things you can avoid by from the very beginning mixing through a mastering chain. Now, this is like our most complex template. It's the Erik Heirman template. It's only available for Ableton. However, we also have a very similar workflow that's available for Ableton, Bitwig, FL Studio, and Logic. It's the Rapid Flow template. It's currently free for Bitwig subscribed users if you have a Bitwig update plan. And if you're on one of the other DAWs, you can grab that on our shop, rapidflow.shop. And then we have the Infinity Bundle, which is again available for those 4 DAWs. And that includes this entire workflow, but also a bunch of instruments that we've recorded here in the studio. So you're ready to go with kick drums, toms, about 16 bass synths, all the drums, so claps, snares, hi-hats, shakers, all that stuff is in there, ready to go. All of that's available over on rapidflow.shop. But what I've shown you today, you can build the most essential parts of getting your low end right just by following along on this video. So that's it for me today. I hope that you found this useful, that you have a great time in the studio. I don't know if I'm going to be doing much more YouTube content in the coming weeks because I'm in the middle of making an instrument called Zensphere that we're going to be releasing, which is why I'm sampling all the synths here in the studio, and then we're going to move house to a new home here in Portugal. So times are super busy, but I wanted to leave you with a super useful video that I think will just really support your musical journey if you're still struggling to get your low end right. And yeah, have something for you to check out while I'm busy here recording instruments and packing boxes. All right, I hope you're having a great time in the studio. I wish you much inspiration, and I'll see you on the next video. Take it easy. Bye-bye.